So I'd like to welcome in everyone. We'll get started today. My name is Susan. I'm a co-founder of the U of T Trash Team and program lead for our volunteer engagement and community programs. And we're really excited to introduce our third webinar as part of a larger series looking at a selection of our pollution prevention projects. Over the course of this series, we've been discussing the four topics you see here on the screen. Today, we're continuing with wet wipes, and then we're going to share more details on how to catch up on the previous webinars, as well as how to join our final webinar at the end of today's talk. And before we get started, it's very important for us to take a moment to recognize the lands on which we are gathering. We acknowledge the diverse and unique groups of Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. In our local work, we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. It is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the William Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. There is a link we have on the slide that I believe Chelsea will share called nativeland.ca. It's a great resource to have a good starting point to learn a little bit more about the regions where you are based as well. So we're sure you're all keen to get started, and many of you have already been sharing. We'd love to take a moment now just to learn a little bit more about what motivated you to join us today. So you can share your responses in the chat, answering either both or either of the questions here, simply who you're representing today, and most importantly, what brought you to today's webinar. What are you hoping to learn? So we'll just take a minute to review what people are sharing, and then we will proceed. I'm just going through some of the messages that I missed from earlier as I was speaking. So we have a few people joining us here from not too far from Toronto. So we have Toronto Region Conservation joining us from the shores of the Humber River, York Region. That's great. Yeah, so before we continue, just would love to learn from those, what brought you here to today's webinar about wet wipes? Okay. So the first kind of comment is really looking to what are the solutions, which we will certainly cover towards the end, looking into towards the enforcement aspect of sewer use. And of course, from us, the U of T Trash Team, while we're leading this work, we're certainly looking to be able to engage more with everyone. This is great. And it's great to see some representatives from our federal government as well from wastewater. Great. Okay. So as you continue to share, I will move on so that we can get to all of these wonderful subjects that we'll be covering today. So before we get into that topic more closely, I just want to give a brief introduction to help contextualize the research within our organization. For those not aware, the U of T Trash Team we formed in 2017 in collaboration with the Rockman Lab at the University of Toronto, and we are a science-based community outreach organization. And we have a shared goal to increase waste literacy as a way to reduce plastic pollution. And the work that we do is supported by our dynamic team of volunteers and students. I think we're on the right slide, and early career researchers who are led by our core staff members, and they each highlight our main work streams. So you can go to the next slide. So those work streams are solutions-based research, community outreach, and education. Chelsea and myself and Rafaela, we lead those areas of work of solutions-based research, outreach, social science, and education programming, respectively. We also have Hannah on our team who works alongside Ocean Conservancy to manage our international trash trap network. And through all the work that we do, scientific evidence really provides the foundation for this work. Within the solutions-based research, our work focuses both upstream and downstream. Upstream referring to those sources of pollution, whereas downstream is targeting once they become pollution. So with our downstream solutions, which include trash traps that we monitor along the waterfront here, this helps us monitor those different types of plastic pollution that we're finding in Lake Ontario, which then connects to work back to inform our upstream work, otherwise known as the pollution prevention projects, which we're highlighting some of these today, aimed at preventing plastic sources from becoming pollution. So that brings us to today. We're talking about an item we find downstream, which are wet wipes. And Simran, who's our lead researcher of our wipes versus pipes, is joining us today and will take us through more details to discuss the problem of plastic wet wipe leakage and associated microplastics in our local aquatic ecosystems. So today she'll be sharing findings from this research to estimate the amounts of wet wipe pollution, as well as what the potential solutions are based on some interviews we or she has been hosting with stakeholders. And so before I do turn things formally over to Simran, I do want to take a moment to thank and acknowledge the collaborators and support that we've had from Community Matters Toronto, as well as partners in Project Green. So thank you all both very much. And now I see Simran on the screen, so I will turn things over to Simran.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you, everyone. It's a real pleasure having you all here, and I'm really excited to get into wipes. So the webinar today will begin with a short presentation from me to provide background on the issue and share the latest findings from Wipes versus Pipes, which is one of the U of T trash team's pollution prevention projects. Following this, we'll have time for you to ask me any questions you may have, and then we'll move on to our panel. I've prepared questions for our panelists, but we'll also open up the floor to audience questions. And joining us today on our panel, we have Jennifer Leno. So Jennifer chairs the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association's Flushables Committee, as well as the Municipal Enforcement Sewer Use Group of Canada. And Jennifer has worked in the municipal wastewater field for 20 years. We also have Shane Trimmer. Shane is the District Director for United States Representative Jared Huffman of California, where he had previously held the position as Representative Huffman's Legislative Director. And we'll have time for longer introductions once we move on to the panel portion. During our Q&As, you'll have a chance to ask questions out loud or in the chat. But in the meantime, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please add those to the chat. And if anyone can answer them right away, we'll respond there. I'd like to now share more about wipes versus pipes. So the overarching goal of wipes versus pipes is to decrease the amount of wet wipe pollution in the environment. And the project was split into two phases. Phase 1 was to conduct research on wipe pollution, and Phase 2 was to inform policy. You can see Phase 1 is further split into 3 aims or questions, each of which I'll touch on now. Just to orient us, I've taken the timeline from the previous slide and just put it at the top of each slide so we can keep track of where we are in the project. So when we're talking about Phase 1, we had 3 research questions. The first was to quantify and characterize wet wipe pollution in the Don River in Toronto. We already knew the mechanism by which wipes were entering the environment in Toronto, but we wanted to know specifically how many we were dealing with. Next, we wanted to understand the wipe market and how the product, its use, and how to throw it away is advertised to consumers. In other words, we wanted to understand if wipe packaging influenced wipe end of life. Finally, we wanted to determine the amount of microplastic shedding from wet wipes, and this was done through an experiment. So I'll share key findings from each, starting with the first question or aim. I also want to highlight that the image here is from my store surveys for aim 2, and you can see that the wipes are advertised in the toilet paper section. Before we can talk about how many wipes are in the environment, I'd like to first clarify how they get there. Wipes enter the environment in Toronto through combined sewage overflow. Toronto has combined sewers, which means rainwater and sewage are held in the same pipes. During storm events in Toronto, with all of that additional rainwater, our wastewater treatment plants are at risk of hitting capacity. To prevent this, the combined pipes are diverted into nearby rivers and streams, meaning sewage waste and untreated water are released directly into the environment. So to answer the question of how many wipes enter the environment, we use the Don River in Toronto because Toronto employs combined sewers and the Don River is a recipient of all of that flushed material. This is a map of the Don. So this study was conducted by Jacob Haney from the Rockman Lab. Jacob sampled the Don River for macroplastics, which are big plastics, during and after storm events. He sampled 4 sites along the Don, which I've highlighted here. The northmost site, German Mills, is actually further north than the map. And then moving south, we have York Mills, Taylor Creek, and Pottery Road. I'm just going to zoom in on that map of the Don now, specifically to one site, Taylor Creek, because Taylor Creek is a site of combined sewage overflow. So the purple circles here highlight where sewers, which are in red, can empty out into Taylor Creek. And empty out they do. On our first figure here, we have sites sampled along the Don on the x-axis and wipes collected per meter squared on the y. The colors represent sampling times relative to storm events. So yellow was sampled at base flow, gray is sampled before a storm, and red after a storm. And because it's a site where flushed material is emptied out, it was not surprising that Taylor Creek had the most wet wipes. Wet wipes actually made up 50% of all plastic litter found at Taylor Creek. Interesting to note is that Pottery Road is the second highest site of wipes. And if we go back to our map, you can see Pottery Road is the only site downstream of Taylor Creek. So not only do we know wipes are entering the Don River after being flushed, but that they also travel down the river towards Lake Ontario. On our second figure here, we have percentage of wipes of all plastic litter counted in the Don River. Across the whole Don, wet wipes made up 25% of all plastic litter. They were the second highest litter type, only behind plastic bags. And from our data, we estimate that at any time, there are 64,000 wet wipes in the Don River. Additionally, we were able to test those wipes for polymer type and confirm that almost all wipes were made of one of two plastic polymers. They were either polyester or polypropylene. Switching gears now to the second aim, which were the store surveys. So I visited 6 different stores in Toronto and assessed wipe packages on what information they provide to consumers. Today, we'll focus on the availability of composition information, which is, do they tell us what the wipe itself is made of, and of disposal information, how to throw away the wipe. So the wipe packages here are separated by if they claim to be flushable or not, and then they're further separated into intended use. So we have baby wipes, and then cleaning or sanitizing wipes, cleansing or facial wipes, pet wipes, and then, for lack of a better term, wiping wipes, which are just wipes used as toilet paper. Very few packages mentioned anything about what the wipes themselves were made of. For example, of 22 baby wipe packages, only 2 presented composition information. It was more common for a wipe package to have some sort of disposal information, and examples of disposal information are the Do Not Flush logo or Do Not Flush written out. Though disposal information was more present, it was not always clear, meaning the disposal information might have been on the back of the package or in small font or in a color that did not contrast with the background, anything that contributed to low visibility to the consumer. The last question we had was, how do wipes break down once in the Don River? We know that wipes enter the Don as macroplastic pollution, and we're now interested in how they might become microplastic pollution. Microplastics are plastics less than 5 millimeters in size, and microfibers are a type of microplastic which are created from the shedding of textiles, like clothing and like wet wipes. To do this, we set up an experiment to test 3 different wipes, 2 made of plastic and 1 made of a flushable material. We prepared 4 by 4 centimeter squares of wipe, and each wipe square was kept in a jar and exposed to various treatments. These treatments were the presence or absence of sun and water, and if they were in water, the presence or absence of physical mixing. The wipes were sampled for white mass and microfiber count at 2 and 6 weeks, so we also had a time treatment. But in the interest of our time today, I'll only share microfiber count at 6 weeks. This box plot shows treatments on the x-axis. The treatments have been abbreviated, and in the bottom left, I just have the meanings. S is sun, NS stands for no sun, W and D are for wet and dry, respectively. M is mixing, and NM is no mixing. And then on the y-axis, we have total microfiber count. Material type is separated by color. So PET, which is one of our plastics, polyester, is green. PP, our second plastic, polypropylene, is blue. And cellulose, our flushable material, is red. And I just want to reiterate, these are the results after 6 weeks of treatment. As expected, our flushable material broke down the most across all treatments, but both plastic polymers, PET and PP, also broke down. I know it might not look like a lot of plastic microfibers were generated, especially in comparison to the flushable material, but if we take an example here, like our no sun, wet, no mixing treatment, the median microfiber shed was about 300 microfibers from the PP wipes. And we only used 4 by 4 centimeter squares of wipe. So if we scale this up to a whole wipe, let's say that's around 1,000 plastic microfibers shed per wipe. We estimated that there were 64,000 wipes in the Don River. So 64,000 wipes with 1,000 microfibers released per wipe, that's a lot of fibers. Generally, we saw polypropylene shed more readily than polyester, and both plastics generated more microfibers when they were in water versus when they were kept dry, meaning plastic wipes that get flushed instead of thrown in the garbage shed more microfibers. Now we're moving into phase 2, which was the informing policy stage. It would be one thing to suggest policy based on this research alone, but we wanted stakeholder or expert input to assess how fruitful certain policy actions would be. I was able to interview various experts involved in the wipe issue, namely wastewater treatment plant professionals, industry, and policymakers in government. I'll share the results from some questions through these stacked bar graphs. In total, I interviewed 5 wastewater professionals, 4 policymakers, and 2 industry members. The questions I asked were open-ended, so I've categorized each response as a yes, a no, or a maybe. Response type is on the y-axis, and the number of each response is on the x. Each stakeholder group is represented by its own color, which is defined by the key at the bottom. The key also displays how many people from each group provided an answer for that question, so if you see that number vary, that's why. The first question I asked was, did you know about the wipes issue? And everyone was somewhat aware, which I think is good. I next asked if wipe pollution could be fixed by changes at the wastewater treatment plant level. So this could include innovations in treatment processes or whole infrastructural changes. You'll see that every wastewater professional voted no, whereas other sectors were more divided. The next question was if industry-led flushability standards are the right solution, meaning flushability standards developed and upheld by white manufacturers themselves. An example of this standard is the GD4. Here, both industry votes said yes, whereas policy and wastewater professionals were mixed. So there isn't a whole consensus at this point. But when asked if the solution meant making white packages display do not flush information, nobody was opposed. Everybody agreed that do not flush labeling being made clear on white packages would be a good thing. Similarly, in regards to governmental involvement, everyone thought the government should step in some way, whether that be in mandating labeling, pushing flushability standards, creating some sort of municipal bylaw, or banning plastic wipes altogether. I know we covered a lot today, so let's quickly summarize our findings. Starting with the big picture, we know wet wipe hotspots are sites downstream of combined sewage overflow, and that wipes made up 25% of all plastic found in the Don River. We also know that only 23 of 72 white packages made their disposal information clear to consumers, and that even fewer mentioned composition information. At the micro scale, we demonstrated that plastic wet wipes do break down into microfibers. And from our interviews, we can say expert opinion on solutions leans towards mandating labels on white packages through/with additional government intervention. From what I've learned, I feel confident suggesting 3 policies which have the greatest stakeholder support. The first would be to enforce the IWSFG. The International Water Services Flushability Group, or the IWSFG, is an international coalition of wastewater professionals and water utilities that have created an external flushability standard. Currently, some brands do voluntarily use the IWSFG, but if that standard is mandated, all flushable wipes will be held to the same standard. Here, I'd also like to quickly shout out Barry Orr, who we've been really lucky to work alongside. Barry is instrumental to the IWSFG and actually enforces the flushability standard in his own lab at TMU. Policy like this has been enacted in places like Charleston in the US, where because wipes were clogging pipes, manufacturers now have to meet the IWSFG. The second would be to mandate do not flush labeling on all non-flushable white packages. And an example of this policy has already passed in California, and currently the Wipes Act is working to be passed federally in the States. And Shane, one of our panelists, was actually a very big part of this process. The third is to ban plastic wet wipes altogether. Our research shows that plastic wet wipes are persistent in the environment. Almost all the wipes we found were plastic, so if non-plastic wipes are being flushed, they might be breaking down efficiently enough for us to not be able to collect them. Additionally, plastic wipes meet the criteria to be included in Canada's single-use plastics ban. I'm happy now to take any questions. I also really quickly want to give a big thanks also to Susan and Chelsea and Rafa, who helped develop this whole project. So as a reminder, you can ask your questions in the chat or out loud, and we'll alternate between both. If you want to ask a question out loud, simply use the raise your hand feature that you can find in the reactions menu, and we'll let you know when it's your turn so you can unmute your mic.
Simran, this is Susan. My hand is not raised, but I do see there was a question in the chat from Matt regarding a specific brand. Let me just find that again, about baby wipes, which, if you recall, which ones were marketed as flushable.
Sorry, I'm trying to find the question.
It's just, can you share which baby wipes are marketed as flushable?
Um, so I don't have, or I shouldn't share brand specific wipes, but baby wipes that were marketed as flushable, um, said so. So it was counted as providing disposal information, and they also were made of some plant-based material. And that's sort of a common factor I found with wipes that advertised themselves as flushable, did advertise not using plastic, if that helps. I can see Robert has made a comment about many market as disposable, biodegradable. Yes. Um, and then I think that also falls into why plastic wipes would fall under the single-use plastics ban, because the idea is single-use, disposable, use them, forget about them. It's very true. We have a question. Was there evidence of the wipes being broken down in the Don? Um, if we're asking about plastic wipes being broken down in the Don, so Jacob's study, where he sampled sites along the Don River, he sampled for big plastics, but he also took water samples for microplastics. And we did find a lot of plastic fibers in the Don, but it's harder to say if they came from wipes or some other textile because clothing also gets flushed. Matt says, to my knowledge, the only baby wipes marketed as flushable are toddler potty training wipes, which are really flushable or moist toilet tissue rather than conventional diapering wipes. I would have to check Matt because I'm really not sure. It was a little bit ago, but I think that's right. We have a question from Chelsea.
No, I'll ask a question while other people are coming up with questions. And this is a legitimate curiosity because I noticed in your interview question, when you talk about the standards, you're talking about industry-led standards, and then you talk about the IWSFG. Can you talk about the difference? Like, where do those different standards come from?
That's a great question, Chelsea. So, to my knowledge, the IWSFG was a standard created by an external group, the International Water Services Flushability Group, which is made up of wastewater professionals and water utility members, whereas industry standards like the GD4 are developed by and upheld by industry. And I'm sure Jennifer can talk about this more, and she knows much more than I do, so I'll save that for her. Robert asked, if you estimate 1,000 fibers per wipe after 6 weeks, what might that be after 6 months? It's a very good question, Robert. I will say in our 2 week and 6 week studies, we did see pretty similar results of microfiber shed, but I don't know what that would look like after 6 months. That would be interesting to know. Eden asks, Simran, are there lots of non-plastic wipes on the market, or is it mostly plastic wipes being offered for sale? That's a really good question, Eden. It's tricky too because plastic wipes won't necessarily advertise themselves as plastic, so it's hard to know without testing, but there are a lot of alternatives on the market, not just for wiping wipes, but also like plant-based wipes for baby wipes and for facial wipes and for pet wipes. So the alternative is there, and I think that market is kind of growing. Is there any evidence to show that the wipes in the Don impacting flora or fauna? That's also a really good question. As the whole wipe itself is one thing, I also think when they break down into microfibers is another because both forms of plastic can affect ecosystem health in different ways. Flora or fauna, we saw a lot of wipes caught in the overhang of the Don, which means like branches or like the riverine area by the Don River. And as fibers, they have the potential to be ingested by organisms, taken up, and then continued to be taken up through the food web. So there are different ways for sure. Did you compare breakdown from Sun of flushable and non-flushable wipes? That's also a really good question. Yes. So in the degradation test, we used the two plastic polymers, polyester and polypropylene. And then we compared that to our flushable material, which was cellulose. And consistently, it was just cellulose would break down much more readily than either of the two plastics. which it's designed to do, which is why I said unsurprising. I found the lack of clear and recognizable disposal information shocking. Can you elaborate on some of the techniques white brands use to minimize disposal information on the packaging? Do laws require this information to be clear and recognizable to the consumer? Um, that's a good question. Currently, there is no policy around what needs to be on the white package in Canada, which is why one of my policy suggestions would be to enact something like that. And actually, Shane will be able to speak to this point really well during the panel because he helped pass bills and motions like that. Some of the techniques white brands use to minimize, so like I said, when there's low visibility, it means like the do not flush label or the written out instruction is on the package, but it's like on the back, or it's like small or with a huge text of information that just makes it difficult to find. And I imagine for someone who's just casually using a wipe, it would be even more difficult to find. I have never flushed any wipes, more about my personal plumbing concerns. However, based on what you are saying, they do not belong in the green bin here in Toronto. Okay, and Eden has taken that one. Are dryer sheets the same as wipes in terms of their threat of putting microfibers in the environment? We actually, dryer sheets get thrown as opposed to like wet wipes that get flushed down the toilet. So they wouldn't have the same impact on aquatic environments as flushed wet wipes do. Robert said even the cellulose wipes use polymers as adhesive agents or other. Yes. Okay. I think this is a good time to switch over to our panelists. And a lot of our questions in the chat also, I think, would be better addressed by the panelists. I know I gave them a really brief introduction at the beginning, but I would like to ask them to introduce themselves and maybe share a little bit more about their involvement with the wipes issue. We can start with Jennifer.
Hi there, Simran and everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So I'm Jennifer Lino. I chair the CWWA Flushables Committee. CWWA stands for the Canadian Water and Wastewater Association. Represents municipal water and wastewater utilities at a national and international level and advocates for those sectors. And Robert Holler, the executive director of CWWA, is actually in the webinar today as a attendee. Hello, Robert. So the goal of the Flushables Committee is to get a national standard in place for what can and cannot be labeled and sold in Canada as a flushable wipe. So flushability standard is what we're calling it. So, and I also chair the Municipal Enforcement Sewer Use Group, also called MISUG. And we're consist of municipalities and utilities across Canada. We started off in Ontario and we go coast to coast. So that's fantastic. But one of the main problems we see time and again in our storm and sanitary sewers are wipes. And we'll talk about the different kind of wipes in a later question. But they've been on our radar for a very long time. And I also work for the town of Cobourg in Ontario. And I am the environmental technician and a class 2 wastewater operator, coming up on 20 years in January.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Shane, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
No, thank you, Simran, for all your great work on this and your presentation beforehand. And thank you all for having me. I'm coming in from the United States today, from California, where I'm Congressman Jared Huffman's district director. Before that, I was his legislative director. Before that, I was the legislative director and professional staff for Congressman Alan Lowenthal from Southern California, who's since retired. While I was working in his office, I had the pleasure of working with some colleagues in this U.S. Senate, Udall's office, and then later Senator Merkley's office from Oregon to develop the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. This is a very wide-ranging, very comprehensive federal bill to address a slew of the issues that we get from single-use plastics, recyclability issues, and other kind of plastic waste concerns. And a part of that initial bill was language to address wet wipes specifically. And so I had the ability to inform that and to be able to work with state, local municipalities, federal environmental organizations and experts, but as well as industry. We had a lot of dialogue with industry to make sure that we were informing something that is practical and achievable, but ambitious, and will be able to address the issue overall. And happy to go into a little bit more details on that, but that's kind of a summary of kind of the background and why I'm here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shane. So my first question is for Jennifer, and is the reason I still am sharing my screen, because I think she had some really cool pictures to share with this. But Jennifer, what have you observed from your standpoint in terms of the severity and or urgency of the wipes issue?
Yeah. Well, as a wastewater backup operator here in Coburg, and environmental tech whose office is at the wastewater plant, I've seen many plugged pumps. And I think there's a photo there that, yeah, that's actually happened in Coburg. That these were our old influent pumps in our raw sewage building, and you can almost hear the pump vibrating so bad it was so plugged with wipes. And we'd have to actually physically turn the pump off, take it out of service, open it up, manually take it out, and these are the wipes that were there. And so it's labor intensive. It's, you know, you're exposing yourself to that. So firsthand, I've seen it in the sanitary sewer system. And through talks with colleagues at MISUG and CWWA, Flushables Committee, um, I've seen so many pictures of the combined sewer overflows, where there's been a big heavy rain event, and you know, you see all the wipes getting pushed out into the environment, along with other debris that's flushed that shouldn't be. And you know, it's infrastructure costs as well, because we had to upgrade our headworks to put in better pumps to deal with the wipes. So, you know, and that relates back onto, you know, the consumers that are the residents and the taxpayers who are paying the infrastructure costs. You know, it kind of comes full circle. And I deal with that in discussions with the public as well. So firsthand complaints and concerns from our residents as well and municipally.
Right. Thank you, Jennifer. And I know all of the wastewater treatment plant professionals I interviewed also expressed the same level of involvement, that this has been here for a while. Next, I want to take it over to Shane. Shane, in your opinion, how should policy be used as a tool to prevent or reduce white pollution?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for so many of these kind of specific plastic pollution efforts, it's kind of case by case based on the specific plastic we're talking about and how it's being used. You know, in the broader Breakthrough from Plastic Pollution Act, we have an intermix of a lot of carrots and sticks to implement different efforts and to address this. You know, for some of the hard to recycle products, for some of the things that are just truly bad for the environment and to human health, we try to ban that. We try to phase those out. There's also efforts that maybe it's recyclable. We just don't have a good system in the United States, or maybe it's this hodgepodge of different municipalities doing different things, and sometimes something works, and we've tried to inform that policy to just try to incentivize governments and industry to try to do better. And this is specifically an example where we have been able to inform what we're trying to do federally to a lot of the efforts and the concerns that have been able to be addressed at the local and the state level. Coming from California, California has been a real leader here. And the great thing about being in California is when a state this big pushes something to be done here, it's hard for industry to do something different across the country. So a lot of things that get done here in California just forces industry to the table, because it's so hard for them to do something for the nearly 40 million people here and not to implement it across the country. Congressman Jared Huffman, who I work with here in California, when he was in the state assembly, put forward what from my research is the first state bill to try to address this issue. And this was more than a decade ago. I think it was about 2010 to address this. And this was to create a standard label. And as Simran, as you said, there are some maybe more aggressive things that we could try to implement, like ban it as a single-use product. But it, as informed from what Jennifer was saying, a lot of the issues that we've been having at the utility level, this really informed a lot of the interest and the concern that brought it to the state level. And from the conversation, it was, how do we figure this out? There's something simple here. Maybe we don't just have to ban this outright. And so there's, from conversations that have happened from utilities, from the state, including industry, and industry's been brought to the table also because of a lot of lawsuits here in the United States because of false labeling. And it ended up being that what we kind of saw was maybe this conversation can be had to work with industry to kind of complement efforts to simply just create better labels and an education standard to try to address this, rather than something a little bit more like banning the product. And so that's what you see a lot of what has happened at the state level. As was mentioned, we do have in 2022, the state of California did finally pass a bill that was largely similar to Congressman Huffman's original bill, and that is to create a standard label across products and to have an education campaign. And that is what informed us at the federal level to try to implement this. Congressman Alan Lowenthal, before he retired, had this initial bill that was bipartisan. Both Republicans and Democrats were co-sponsoring this and pushing this. After he retired, new Representative McClellan from Michigan, a Republican, has been pushing this, and it did pass the House of Representatives. We're still waiting for action in the Senate. But that is the way that we're trying to push this right now, and it's a bipartisan effort. It seems like there's an effort and an interest there, and so it seems like that's the one that has worked for us, and we're still crossing our fingers that we can get that across the finish line here soon.
Right. Thank you so much, Shane. And you also touched on a lot of things I was thinking about, how it's very important to sort of get multiple perspectives to push policy, because you want it to be supported and you want input from various stakeholder groups. I am going to open it up to audience Q&A, but really quickly, I wanted to ask Jennifer, because this was also Chelsea's question earlier. I touched on the IWSFG very briefly, but Jennifer, can you tell us what specifically are flushability standards, the different kinds of standards, and how can they be used to prevent pollution?
Right. So, I mean, first, as you clarified in your presentation, we're kind of dealing with two different types of wipes. There's the baby wipes, the cleaning wipes, the disinfecting wipes, the wipes that are very, very hard to pull apart, that should never be flushed. And that, that is being dealt with the Wipes Act and with proper labeling of do not flush and getting that information out there by the manufacturers. And that has gotten a lot better over the years. The other wipes are the wipes that, actually will break down in the system and are therefore labeled flushable. So the flushability standards are looking at those wipes, and the flushability standards, in particular, the one that CWWA is supporting, is the IWSFG publicly available specifications. So they're not standards yet. And the one criteria that I think is the most important, besides breaking apart very quickly, is that they are not to contain cellulose. They must undergo a fiber analysis and a fiber test, and they cannot contain any plastic or regenerated cellulose, because that is what is contributing to the microplastic issue, microparticles in the water environment. So so the IWSFG specifications are not a standard yet. The GD4 is not a standard yet. It's a guideline specifications. So they help in that they identify the ones that you should not flush. And then if they pass the certain criteria, such as not containing plastic in particular, like the IWSFG states, then you're not going to get that plastic pollution in the receiving environment.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to just quickly reiterate that in the time we have left, it's now being opened up to the audience if you have any questions. As a reminder, you can ask your questions in the chat or out loud, and we'll alternate between both. And if you want to ask a question out loud, please use the raise your hand feature that you can find in the reactions menu, and we'll let you know when it's your turn so you can unmute your mic. I see we have a question from Matt. Matt, please take it away.
Matt, you're on mute if you could.
Sorry, I thought you were unmuting me. So first of all, I want to thank all of you for all of this. I think it's great work. Shane, obviously we've worked with your friends in California and also at the national level, and I think this is a very worthwhile effort overall. One question I did have is, are you aware, and then what is your opinion of the ISO, the International Standards Organization, effort to put a flushability standard in place that would be then globally applicable?
Yeah, I can answer some of that. Barry Orr, who's a spokesperson for our MESA group, is actually one of the technical experts on that ISO work. And he is also the chair of the labeling sub working group. I don't know if he's still on this call, but he might be better able to answer that. I know that the last ISO effort in 2014 to 2016 was not successful in getting a standard. It was successful in getting a technical report out there. But yeah, Barry might be the better one to ask that question to. I don't know if he's still on here, but
I can certainly give some other comment because I do work with Barry on that committee. The current standard effort is out for ballot right now, hopefully to be adopted, so that we can get into a global standard with the appropriate labeling as well.
does it have a plastic component in there criteria?
It has a combination of the various protocols that are out there, IWFSG, the GD4, as well as some others as well.
And I am seeing we have a hand up from Barry. Barry,
Thanks,
would you mute yourself?
Good morning. Thanks for taking my hand on this. And Matt, thanks for bringing that topic up, because I do think that our ISO work is very important on labeling, because we have now been able to work with the manufacturers and the wastewater groups to come up with a universal label for do not flush. And I think that's really important for us to start promoting this universal label. So hopefully the ISO will proceed with at least the labeling part of it moving forward. I may not be 100% supportive of having all of these testing guidelines into the ISO, but definitely the labeling I think we've collaborated on, and this is how we can move forward with this universal. It's black, it's white, it's red, that's it. And we move that forward. And I think with California's legislation possibly being amended to incorporate that label, we'll see success with education and awareness. So thanks for that.
Thank you so much, Barry.
And with the standards, the international standards, we tried to use that to inform a lot of what we were putting into the broader Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, but also the Wipes Act, and if you look at the Wipes Act, it's gone through some variations, but even the most recent one does identify the current accepted international standards for some of the label, exactly what Barry said, the label specific.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. We do have another question in the chat. It's interesting that the industry experts answered that wipes could be handled with upgrades to wastewater infrastructure. I'm wondering if the panel could comment on this.
I being at the wastewater plant, so handling upgrades to the wastewater infrastructure. Again, being from the wastewater perspective, that means wastewater infrastructure costs, capital costs, taxpayers' input, trying to find funding. It's not free. It takes time and it takes money, and that money comes from taxpayers. So unfortunately, why at the end of the line should it be up to the taxpayers and the municipalities to have to deal with stuff that's being put in the system that they don't want in the system to begin with? So, I mean, we are trying to accommodate by putting in new chopper pumps and by putting in grinders, because we know that we have to deal with this regardless, no matter how much, we educate and try to outreach to our residents. It's still there. So it's a
Yeah,
tough one.
and I'm curious about the responses from industry specifically on that question. A lot of the action that has taken place here is because of the groundswell from utilities across the board. And that's why it's a bipartisan issue, is because you're hearing this across the country, and exactly the kind of the dollars and cents that this is impacting and being put, that burden being put onto the taxpayers themselves. The last, I think it's a few years old, but the last assessment I saw was that it was about $500 million a year in the United States annually that utilities are putting toward addressing the trying to fix pipes, declog pumps, install grinders, install filters, and I think that that's probably an underassessment. One that is, excuse me, the utilities themselves. But that's probably not including these things like these fatbergs, as it's intertwining with the grease that's going down the drain, that's just creating these big issues, as well as before it even gets to the utility, the cost that's being onto the households themselves. I've heard horror stories about people who didn't realize that they couldn't flush these. They clean a kitchen, throw them all down the toilet, and then all of a sudden they have to they have to take the toilet out and their pipes out at their household. So I think a lot of these cost estimates are also a lot lower than what the actual impact is.
Yeah, thank you, Shane and Jennifer. I also want to clarify, I think Matt's also put it in the chat. By the nature of how I shared responses, by just sort of narrowing them down to a yes, no, maybe, sometimes members would give a response, hinting towards solutions or innovations, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they thought those were like the most applicable or best solutions, which is why I really focused on the consensus we got for some sort of government action or mandating labeling. I think that's sort of where I got the most positive responses across the board. Matt, you have your hand up if you would like to chime in again.
Yeah, this was actually very spurred of thought. I had an earlier question about pipes market as flushable, and the reason is when those things occur, occasionally we see imported product from other regions that show up in North America. We would like to address those. We'd like to keep them aligned with the flushability standards, and Barry in particular has been a great proponent of this and has provided us a number of examples where, while we don't have any policing authority on this, we can certainly reach out to manufacturers to make sure they're adhering to what we think should be good labeling guidelines and practices. So thank you, Barry, for your assistance in that over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I also want to touch on what Shane had said earlier about when legislation is passed in California, it's easier to get it standardized across the country. And I think that's also true for Canada. It's nice to have one labeling standard or any kind of standard that every manufacturer can follow. I just think it's easier across the board for everyone. So we do still have a few minutes if we have any last minute burning questions. And if I missed your question in the chat, I'm sorry, please just send it again. Hey, I mean, I still have one question I could ask to my panelists. So we know that the wipes issue is a very multifaceted issue. What's the best way for consumers and industry, policymakers, wastewater treatment plant workers to come together to resolve it?
I think that, like you said, it's a multifaceted problem, and that it'd be a multifaceted approach to it. So definitely education, outreach, municipalities to the residents, as well as manufacturers to the consumer via labeling. And I know that many manufacturers have come out with some public service announcements about, how to flush, what to not flush, and if it has this, it's okay to flush, kind of thing. So there is a lot more education coming from that end that wasn't there in past years. So that's a great step. And again, like a global or a national standard or a North American standard, flushability standard, that, you know, focuses on not having any plastic content in there, because that really is the issue getting into the environment and affecting, you know, the creatures and the folks that works up the food chain in the aquatic environment. And then, I mean, we are working on infrastructure modifications over time. I mean, combined sewers came into effect in the 1850s, before we had sewers. So, you know, the cholera outbreak, and they were better than what we had. And then now that we've done so much urbanization, there's less permeable green spaces. We're getting a lot more water in those systems, and that's causing, you know, it's like kind of like the perfect storm, no, no pun intended. But yeah, and I know that Toronto in particular does have a plan in place, a multi-year plan, multi-billion-dollar plan to work on infrastructure issues that are resulting in some of these overflows.
And I think, you know, the example here in the United States is that it is one that is kind of a best case scenario. It's going slower than we want, but, you know, informed by the pressure and the issues and the costs that the utilities are facing, informing state and local policies that then get informed at the federal level. You know, this is kind of the way the system's supposed to work. And as it goes up there, bringing industry in, bringing other experts in to find a way to have something that works for all parties is really the best case scenario. And so we're really hoping that this works, and it's in the best interest for everybody, for people to come to the table and for this to work in this way. Because if industry doesn't come to the table and has something again that's you know, ambitious and achievable, and it works, because that education campaign, because that standard wipe label works, and we see less of the issue going to the folks that like Jennifer at the utility, well then that's saving money, and all of a sudden they're not asking their local representatives to address this issue. You know, the problem is if industry pushes back, or if they try to push something that isn't fully ambitious enough to address this issue, well then guess what, we're going to have to find other alternatives that's going to force them to the table, either for a label, or what's really not going to be helpful for them is if we address this through banning it as a single-use plastic, you know. And so that's something that the industry doesn't want. And it could be that simply by having an education campaign and a standardized label, that the issue works out, that the utilities aren't being impacted anymore. It's not going into the environment the way, I mean, we're still going to have microfiber issues, and that's going to be a whole other conversation, a whole other 4 times longer webinar. But, you know, for this specifically, I think standard label education campaign can work. And I think that conversation has been being had in a healthy way, at least recently.
I agree. And I also think there's nobody who wants plastic wipes in the environment. So we're all coming to the table with a common goal. That's all we have time for today, unfortunately. I'd like to thank Jennifer and Shane again for joining us today, and for everyone who participated in the questions. Having different perspectives are so valuable, and I think contributed to a really great discussion. I'd like to hand it back over now to Susan for our final few minutes.
Yes, amazing. So exactly what Simran said. Thank you so much to Jennifer and Shane for sharing your time and expertise with us today. It was actually really great to see how many questions were happening and that we were able to get to so many of them. So we hope everyone took a lot of takeaways today. If you want more information on the project, you can go to our website, and there actually is some great awareness pieces that Simran created. We have a wonderful infographic about the journey of a flushed wet wipe that she's also made into hard copy postcards that we bring to events. So you can not only have an image of it, but send it to your friend to help promote awareness that way. And these same infographics are actually up by the change tables at Ripley's Aquarium in Toronto, which has been a fantastic application on the awareness side. So we do have one more webinar to wrap up this series, going to construction foam. as a source of plastic pollution. That will be taking place at the same time, noon Eastern time, but on Tuesday, December 3rd. If you haven't already registered, you're welcome to join us. It'll be the same link from today, and you can go back to the same Eventbrite to register. And we will have a recording from today. If you knew people who weren't able to join, or if you want to rewatch it, we will email that to everyone just as soon as it's available. So please do stay in touch with us. Our information is up here on the screen. You can follow us on social media or send us an email anytime. And with that, I'd like to send a final thank you to everyone, and especially to Simran for hosting this amazing research and sharing it with all of you today. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.